The bitter wind of Kansas territory cut through Jessamine Porter's threadbare shawl as she stood outside the stagecoach station, her heart as empty as her pockets. All she had in this world was the crumpled letter clutched in her trembling fingers, and a name that meant nothing now: Nathaniel Wilkes. "Last call for Clearwater Creek," the stagecoach driver announced, eyeing her with impatience. "You boarding, miss, or just planning to freeze to death right there?" Jessamine swallowed hard, her throat dry from the dusty journey. "I have no money for passage, sir. I was told, I was promised." Her voice faltered. How could she explain that she'd traveled over 1,000 miles on the promise of marriage to a man who'd apparently vanished without a trace? "Then you'd best find shelter before nightfall," the driver said, not unkindly. "Wolves come in all forms out here, especially after dark." The stagecoach departed in a cloud of dust, leaving Jessamine alone with her small carpet bag containing everything she owned: 2 dresses, a hairbrush, and the letters from Nathaniel that had convinced her to leave Philadelphia behind. Letters filled with promises of love and a new life together in the West. Letters that had apparently been nothing but lies. The town of Clearwater Creek sprawled before her, a single dusty street lined with wooden buildings, most bearing the weathered look of frontier establishments. A saloon, general store, blacksmith, and what appeared to be a small hotel stood among the scattered businesses. The place was a far cry from the thriving community Nathaniel had described. As the October sun began its descent toward the horizon, panic fluttered in Jessamine's chest. She was 22 years old, alone in a strange town with no money and no prospects. What would become of her now? The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her turn. A tall man on horseback slowed his mount as he neared. His face was partially obscured by the brim of his worn leather hat, but she could see he was studying her intently. "You look lost," he said, his voice deep and tinged with the drawl of the frontier. "I'm looking for a man named Nathaniel Wilkes," she replied, straightening her shoulders despite her exhaustion. "Do you know him?" The stranger's expression darkened. He dismounted in one fluid motion, revealing his considerable height. Up close, she could see he was perhaps 30, with sun-weathered skin, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and eyes the color of a summer storm. "Who's asking after Wilkes?" His tone had turned cautious. "My name is Jessamine Porter. I came from Philadelphia to marry him." She lifted her chin, though she felt a flush of embarrassment heat her cheeks. "But it seems he's not here to meet me as promised." The man removed his hat, revealing thick chestnut hair that curled slightly at his collar. "Miss Porter, I'm afraid I have some difficult news." Nathaniel Wilkes passed away 3 months ago. Typhoid fever took him quick. The world seemed to tilt beneath Jessamine's feet. She stumbled, and the stranger reached out to steady her with a strong hand. "I'm sorry to be the bearer of such tidings," he continued, genuine sympathy in his eyes. "Wilkes owned the small cattle ranch north of town. I bought it from the bank after his passing." "I see," Jessamine whispered, though she didn't see it all. Her future had just vanished before her eyes. "Thank you for telling me." "Name's Rylan," he said, releasing her arm once she seemed steady. "Rylan Blackwood. Pleased to meet you, Mr. Blackwood," she replied automatically, her mind still reeling from the news. I need to." "You need somewhere to stay," he finished for her, glancing at the darkening sky. "The Clearwater Inn has rooms, but they don't come cheap." Jessamine looked away, ashamed. "I'm afraid I have very little money." Rylan was quiet for a moment, considering. "Mrs. Abernathy at the boarding house might take you in. She sometimes lets rooms in exchange for help with cooking and cleaning." "That's very kind of you to suggest." Jessamine clutched her carpet bag tighter. "Could you direct me there?" Instead of answering, Rylan secured her bag to his saddle. "I'll take you. It's getting dark, and Clearwater isn't always kind to newcomers after sundown." He offered his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Jessamine took it. His palm was calloused but warm as he helped her onto his horse, then mounted behind her. "I'm sorry about Nathaniel," Rylan said as they rode slowly down the main street. "Did you know him well?" "Only through letters," Jessamine admitted, feeling foolish. "We corresponded for nearly a year. He placed an advertisement seeking a bride, and I responded." "A mail-order bride," Rylan murmured, no judgment in his voice. "That's not uncommon out here." My parents died last winter, she explained, unsure why she was confiding in this stranger. The family home went to pay debts. I was working as a seamstress, but she trailed off, unwilling to speak of the unwanted advances from her employer that had made her desperate to escape. And now you're here with nothing but his name, Rylan said quietly. Yes. The simple truth of it brought tears to her eyes, which she blinked away fiercely. They stopped in front of a 2-story wooden house with a small porch and neat curtains in the windows. A sign reading Abernathy Boarding House hung beside the door. Rylan dismounted and helped Jessamine down, then retrieved her bag. Mrs. Abernathy is stern but fair, he said. Tell her I sent you. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. Jessamine extended her hand formally. You've been most kind. He took her hand but didn't shake it, just held it for a moment longer than propriety dictated. This territory can be harsh, Miss Porter, but there are good people here too. Don't lose heart. With that, he mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Jessamine to face the next chapter of her uncertain future. Mrs. Eleanor Abernathy was indeed stern, a tall, thin woman with silver-streaked black hair pulled into a tight bun, but after hearing Jessamine's predicament, she softened slightly. So you came all this way to marry a dead man, she said, shaking her head. The Lord tests us in mysterious ways, child. I can work, Jessamine said quickly. I'm skilled with a needle and thread. I can cook and clean. I don't require much, just a place to stay until I can make other arrangements. Mrs. Abernathy studied her for a long moment. Very well, I could use help with the mending and meals. I'll give you room and board in exchange for your labor, plus $2 a week. Relief washed over Jessamine. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Thank you, Mrs. Abernathy, I'm most grateful. Rylan Blackwood vouched for you, the older woman replied, leading her upstairs. That carries weight in this town. He's a good man, honest and hardworking. Came here 3 years ago and built up a respectable ranch. When Wilkes died owing money to half the town, Rylan bought the property fair and square. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and a window overlooking the street below. It was a far cry from what Jessamine had imagined her new life would be, but at least she had a roof over her head. Rest tonight, Mrs. Abernathy said from the doorway. Tomorrow we'll see what you're made of. As it turned out, Jessamine was made of sterner stuff than even she had realized. The work was hard, rising before dawn to help prepare breakfast for the boarders, washing dishes, scrubbing floors, doing laundry, and mending clothes until her fingers ached. But there was dignity in honest labor, and Mrs. Abernathy, though never effusive with praise, seemed satisfied with her efforts. Word spread quickly through the small community about the Eastern woman who'd come to marry Nathaniel Wilkes, only to find him dead and buried. Some looked at her with pity, others with suspicion. What kind of woman would travel alone to marry a man she'd never met? Week after her arrival, Jessamine was hanging laundry in the yard behind the boarding house when she heard the gate open. Turning, she found Rylan Blackwood watching her, hat in hand. Mr. Blackwood, she acknowledged, surprised by the small flutter in her chest at the sight of him. What brings you to town? Supply run, he replied, gesturing toward the general store down the street. Thought I'd see how you're settling in. As well as can be expected, thank you. She pinned a sheet to the line, aware of his eyes on her. Mrs. Abernathy has been most accommodating, Rylan nodded, running a hand through his hair. I've been thinking about your situation, Miss Porter. There's something you should know. Jessamine tensed. Yes, Wilkes left behind some personal effects. The bank took most everything of value to cover his debts, but I have a trunk of his papers and such. There might be letters from you in there. I thought you might want them back. The thought of her private correspondence being read by strangers made her stomach turn. I would appreciate that very much. I could bring the trunk by next time I'm in town, he offered. That's very thoughtful. She hesitated, then added, Mr. Blackwood, may I ask you something about Nathaniel? What kind of man was he? Rylan shifted his weight, considering his words carefully. Wilkes was well-liked in town, charming, you might say, good with cards and stories, not so good with cattle or paying his debts on time. It wasn't the answer she'd expected, and a frown creased her brow. I see. I'm sorry if that's not what you wanted to hear, Rylan said gently. No, I appreciate your honesty. she resumed hanging the laundry, needing the distraction. It's just strange to mourn someone I never truly knew. Rylan stepped closer, lowering his voice. There's something else. Wilkes wasn't in the habit of keeping his promises. You might not have found what you were expecting even if he'd lived. The implication hung in the air between them. Had Nathaniel been writing to other women? Had he ever intended to marry her at all? Thank you for the warning, she said quietly. Though it comes rather late. A flash of remorse crossed his features. I'm sorry, that was indelicate of me. No, you're right to tell me. Jessamine sighed, brushing a stray lock of auburn hair from her face. Better to know the truth, however painful. Mrs. Abernathy's voice called from the back door. Jessamine, the bread needs attending. I should go, she said, gathering her empty basket. I'll bring that trunk by soon, Rylan promised, replacing his hat. He hesitated, then added, Don't judge yourself too harshly for coming here, Miss Porter. Hope is never foolish, even when it leads us astray. His words stayed with her as she kneaded bread dough and Mrs. Abernathy's kitchen, wondering what her next step should be. Philadelphia held nothing for her now, but what future could she possibly have in Clearwater Creek? True to his word, Rylan returned 3 days later with a small wooden trunk. Jessamine was sweeping the front porch when he arrived, his wagon pulling up outside the boarding house. As promised, he said, lifting the trunk from the wagon bed. Where would you like it? My room, if you don't mind, she replied, leading him inside and up the narrow stairs. In the privacy of her small room, Rylan set the trunk on the floor. I didn't look through it, he assured her. Whatever's inside is your business. Thank you. She knelt beside the trunk, running her fingers over the rough wood, for everything you've done. Rylan remained standing, hat in hand, watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Miss Porter, Jessamine, he began, then stopped. I have a proposition for you. She looked up sharply, wariness in her eyes. Not that kind, he clarified quickly, a flush crossing his tanned face. I need help at my ranch. My housekeeper, Mrs. Finch, is getting on in years and can't manage alone anymore. I'm offering you a position room, board, and fair wages. Why me? Jessamine asked, genuinely puzzled. Surely there are others in town more qualified. Perhaps, he conceded. But you strike me as someone who works hard and doesn't complain. Those qualities are rare enough, he paused. And I thought, well, the ranch was supposed to be your home. Maybe it still could be in a different way. The offer was tempting. Working for a single man might raise eyebrows, but the prospect of leaving the scrutiny of town behind held undeniable appeal. I would need to give Mrs. Abernathy proper notice, she said slowly, and I would expect clear terms of employment. A smile broke across his face, transforming his serious features. Of course, I'll draw up a proper agreement. He moved toward the door, then turned back. Take your time with your decision. The offer stands regardless of what's in that trunk. After he left, Jessamine sat for a long time looking at the trunk before finally working up the courage to open it. Inside, she found bundles of letters, her letters to Nathaniel, many still sealed and unread. Beneath them were other bundles, tied with different colored ribbons. Letters from other women, she realized with a sinking heart. At least 3 different correspondents, all believing they were writing to their future husband. Tears blurred her vision as the full extent of Nathaniel's deception became clear. Had he been playing some cruel game, collecting potential brides like butterflies? Or had he simply been hedging his bets, planning to choose whichever woman arrived first or suited him best? At the bottom of the trunk, she found a leather-bound journal. Opening it revealed Nathaniel's handwriting, charming, flowing script filling page after page with detailed accounts of poker games, drinking exploits, and women he'd known in various towns. The entries grew more desperate toward the end, as his debts mounted and his health began to fail. The final entry, dated just weeks before his death, read, Eastern bride arriving soon. Should solve financial troubles if she brings expected dowry. If not, Colorado might be my next destination. Jessamine closed the journal with trembling hands, so that was it. He'd expected her to bring money. The modest sum she'd managed to save had barely covered her journey west. She'd come with nothing but hope and trust, both now shattered beyond repair. The following morning, she sought out Rylan at the general store where he was purchasing supplies. I accept your offer, she told him quietly. When would you like me to start? Relief and something warmer flashed in his eyes. Is a week enough time to settle your affairs here? More than enough. She handed him a folded paper. I've written down my terms, duties, compensation, and days off. If these are acceptable to you, I'll be ready to leave next Friday. Rylan read through her neat handwriting and nodded. These terms are fair. I'll have the agreement ready for you to sign before then. He hesitated. Did you find what you were looking for in the trunk? I found the truth, she replied simply. And while it wasn't what I hoped for, I'm grateful to know it. He studied her face for a moment. You're stronger than you look, Jessamine Porter. I'm learning to be, she answered, turning to leave. A week from Friday, Mr. Blackwood. Rylan, he corrected. If we're to work together, you might as well use my given name. Rylan, she repeated, testing the sound of it. Until Friday, then. The Blackwood Ranch was a revelation to Jessamine. Unlike the dilapidated image she'd conjured in her mind, the property was well maintained. With a sturdy two-story house, large barn, bunkhouse for the handful of ranch hands, and corrals filled with healthy cattle and horses. Located 15 miles from town, it sat nestled in a valley with a creek running through it and rolling hills beyond. It's beautiful, she breathed as Rylan's wagon crested the final hill, revealing the ranch spread out below. It's home, he replied simply, a note of pride in his voice. I built most of it myself, with help from the men. Mrs. Finch, the housekeeper, proved to be a cheerful woman in her 60s with a perpetual smile and hands gnarled from arthritis. She welcomed Jessamine warmly, showing her to a comfortable bedroom at the back of the house, far from Rylan's quarters on the second floor. It'll be a blessing having another pair of hands around here, Mrs. Finch confided. The master works from sunup to sundown and expects his meals on time. He's fair, though never raises his voice even when things go wrong. How many men work the ranch? Jessamine asked, unpacking her meager belongings. 4 regular hands plus extra help during roundup and branding. Good men, all of them. The master doesn't tolerate troublemakers or drinkers. Jessamine quickly settled into the rhythm of ranch life. She rose before dawn to help Mrs. Finch prepare breakfast for Rylan and the hands, then spent her days cleaning, mending, baking, and learning to tend the kitchen garden. The work was hard but satisfying, and for the first time since arriving in Kansas territory, she felt a sense of purpose. Rylan himself was often absent during daylight hours, working with the cattle or riding the boundaries of his property. But in the evenings, he would take his dinner in the kitchen, sometimes lingering to talk with Jessamine after Mrs. Finch retired to her small cottage behind the main house. Why did you come west? She asked him one night in early November as they sat across the kitchen table, the remains of apple pie between them. Rylan leaned back in his chair, considering. I fought in the war Confederate side. When it ended, there wasn't much left of the world I knew in Virginia. My family's plantation was gone, my brother's dead. The West seemed like a place where a man could start fresh, where no one cared which side you'd fought on. Do you miss Virginia? She asked, trying to imagine this rugged man in the genteel society of the South. A smile touched his lips. Sometimes, mostly I miss the greenery, the soft hills, but I've found beauty here too different, wilder, but no less real. I can understand that, Jessamine said softly. I miss Philadelphia's cobblestone streets and shops, but there's something about the open sky here that makes me feel free. Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment, Jessamine felt a connection that went beyond employer and employee. Then Rylan stood, breaking the spell. Dawn comes early, he said, collecting his hat from the peg by the door. Good night, Jessamine. Good night, Rylan. As November deepened toward winter, Jessamine found herself watching for Rylan's return each evening, anticipating their quiet conversations. He was unlike any man she'd known before, thoughtful and articulate beneath his frontier exterior, with a dry humor that often caught her by surprise. She learned he read voraciously, maintained a small library in his study, and could recite poetry from memory, a talent that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. For his part, Rylan seemed to take increasing interest in her comfort, bringing back small gifts from his trips to town, a bolt of blue fabric that matched her eyes, a jar of honey from the general store, a novel he thought she might enjoy. Nothing improper, nothing that crossed the boundaries between them, but gestures that spoke of growing regard. One afternoon, as the first snow of the season began to fall, Jessamine was gathering eggs in the henhouse when she heard a commotion from the direction of the corral. Setting down her basket, she hurried outside to see the ranch hands gathered around something on the ground. As she drew closer, her heart lurched. It was Rylan, lying motionless in the mud. "What happened?" she demanded, pushing through the men. "Horse threw him," explained Joe, the oldest of the hands. "Caught him by surprise when that new stallion spooked at nothing." Rylan was conscious but clearly in pain, his face pale beneath his tan. "It's nothing," he gritted out, "just winded." "Let me see," Jessamine insisted, kneeling beside him regardless of the mud soiling her dress. Gentle but firm, she ran her hands along his limbs, checking for breaks. When she reached his left side, he winced sharply. "Ribs," she diagnosed. "Possibly broken. We need to get him inside." With the help of the men, they managed to transport Rylan to the house and up to his bedroom, a domain Jessamine had never entered before. The room was unexpectedly neat, with a large bed, dresser, washstand, and desk positioned beneath the window that overlooked the ranch. "I can manage now," Rylan insisted once he was seated on the edge of the bed. "It's just a bruise." "Nonsense," Jessamine replied, already rolling up her sleeves. "Mrs. Finch, please bring hot water and clean bandages. Joe, ride for the doctor in town." Alone with Rylan, she helped him remove his mud-caked shirt, averting her eyes from his bare chest as propriety demanded, though not before noticing the network of scars that testified to a hard life. "This will hurt," she warned, gently probing his ribs. Rylan sucked in a sharp breath but didn't complain as she worked. "Too broken, I think. You're fortunate it's no worse." "Wouldn't be the first time," he said through clenched teeth. "That doesn't make it any less serious." She began cleaning the mud and blood from a gash on his forehead. "You could have been killed. Would that have troubled you?" he asked quietly, his eyes searching hers. Jessamine's hands stilled. "Of course it would. We all depend on you here." Something shifted in his expression, disappointment perhaps, but Mrs. Finch entered with the bandages then, and the moment passed. The doctor confirmed Jessamine's diagnosis: 2 broken ribs that would take weeks to heal properly. Rylan was ordered to rest, an instruction he immediately began to resist. "A ranch doesn't run itself," he argued as soon as the doctor departed. "No, but you have capable men who can follow instructions," Jessamine countered. "And you'll recover faster if you don't re-injure yourself through stubbornness." Their battle of wills continued for days, with Rylan attempting to resume his normal activities and Jessamine finding increasingly creative ways to thwart him. She enlisted the ranch hands to report his movements, moved his boots to where he couldn't reach them without pain, and once even hid his hat, a transgression that earned her a thunderous scowl but ultimately compliance. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met," he declared one evening as she changed his bandages. "A necessary quality when dealing with equally stubborn men," she replied evenly, though a smile tugged at her lips. "Now hold still." The forced convalescence changed the dynamic between them. With Rylan confined to the house, Jessamine spent more time in his company. She read to him in the evening's newspapers from town, novels from his collection, even letters from his cattle broker that required responses. She took his dictation, her neat handwriting replacing his bold scrawl on business correspondence. As December arrived, bringing with it preparations for Christmas, Jessamine found herself humming as she worked. Despite the circumstances that had brought her to Kansas, despite the betrayal of Nathaniel's false promises, she had found something unexpected at the Blackwood Ranch: contentment, purpose, and perhaps something more that she dared not name. One evening, as snow fell softly outside the windows, Rylan watched Jessamine decorate the small pine tree they'd brought inside. Mrs. Finch had retired early with a cold, leaving them alone in the warm kitchen. "You seem happy," he observed, seated at the table with a cup of coffee. Jessamine paused, a string of cranberries in her hands. "I am," she admitted, "happier than I expected to be. Because of the ranch," she considered the question carefully. "Partly, it's become home in a way I didn't anticipate." She turned to face him fully, "But it's more than that." It's the people here, Mrs. Finch, the hands. You, Rylan set down his cup, his expression unreadable. Jessamine, there's something I need to tell you, something about Nathaniel Wilkes. Her heart skipped a beat. What about him? I knew him better than I've let on. Rylan's voice was low, troubled. We weren't friends, far from it. Wilkes owed me money, a substantial amount. When he died, the bank foreclosed on the ranch, but I had a prior claim on part of the property. I don't understand, Jessamine said slowly. Why wouldn't you have told me this before? Rylan ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. Because I didn't want you to think I'd taken advantage of his death. The truth is, Wilkes was planning to sell the ranch out from under his creditors, including me, and flee to Colorado. When I found out you were coming, I wanted to see what kind of woman would agree to marry a man like that. The revelation stung, though Jessamine wasn't sure why. So you offered me employment out of what? Curiosity? Pity, at first perhaps, he admitted, but that changed quickly. I came to admire your strength, your dignity in the face of difficulty, and then… He trailed off, looking away, and then, she prompted, her pulse quickening. And then I began to envy a dead man, Rylan said quietly. A man who'd done nothing to deserve the loyalty of a woman like you. The admission hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither seemed ready to voice. I should finish the tree, Jessamine said finally, turning back to her task with trembling hands. Of course, Rylan stood, moving toward the door. Good night, Jessamine. Good night, she whispered, listening to his footsteps retreat up the stairs. That night, lying in her bed, Jessamine faced the truth she'd been avoiding for weeks. She was falling in love with Rylan Blackwood. The realization should have frightened her after the disaster with Nathaniel, but instead it brought a strange sense of peace. This wasn't the desperate gamble of a mail-order arrangement. This was a feeling that had grown naturally, day by day, built on respect and shared experiences. But did Rylan feel the same? His words suggested he might, yet he'd made no declaration, no offer beyond employment. Perhaps he saw her only as a convenient housekeeper, a replacement for aging Mrs. Finch. The thought brought an ache to her chest that had nothing to do with physical pain. The week before Christmas brought a blizzard that isolated the ranch, trapping them all indoors as snow piled high against the windows and wind howled around the eaves. The ranch hands remained in the bunkhouse, leaving only Rylan, Jessamine, and Mrs. Finch in the main house. On the third day of the storm, Mrs. Finch's cold worsened into a fever. Concerned, Jessamine insisted the older woman remain in bed in her cottage, which Rylan had helped make comfortable with extra blankets and a roaring fire. I'll check on her every few hours, Jessamine assured Rylan as they trudged back to the main house through waist-deep snow. But I think it's best if she stays isolated until the fever breaks. Agreed, he said, holding the door for her. You're good with the sick. Where did you learn that? My mother, she replied, stomping snow from her boots. She was often called to assist neighbors during illness. She believed in practical remedies and clean conditions above all else. Inside, the house felt eerily quiet without Mrs. Finch's cheerful presence. Jessamine busied herself preparing a simple dinner, aware of Rylan watching her from the doorway. Would you prefer to eat in your study? She asked, avoiding his gaze. No, he said. I'd rather have company if you don't mind. They ate in companionable silence, the storm providing a constant backdrop of sound. Afterward, as Jessamine cleared the dishes, Rylan disappeared upstairs, returning with a small package wrapped in brown paper. I was saving this for Christmas, he explained, placing it on the table. But with the storm and Mrs. Finch's illness, I thought you might appreciate it now. Curious, Jessamine untied the string and folded back the paper to reveal a leather-bound journal with her initials JP embossed in gold on the cover. It's beautiful, she breathed, running her fingers over the soft leather. I noticed you writing sometimes in the evenings on scraps of paper, Rylan said. Thought you might like something more permanent. The thoughtfulness of the gift touched her deeply. Thank you, it's perfect. There's something else. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small envelope. This came for you last week. I forgot about it with everything happening. The letter bore the return address of Patterson and Sons, Solicitors, Philadelphia. Puzzled, Jessamine opened it, her eyes widening as she read. "Is everything all right?" Rylan asked, noting her expression. "It's from my father's former lawyer," she explained, still scanning the letter. "Apparently, an investment my father made years ago has finally paid dividends. It's not a fortune, but it's enough to." She looked up, a new possibility dawning. Enough to start fresh somewhere if I chose to. Something flickered in Rylan's eyes, alarm, disappointment. "I see," he said carefully. "Will you be returning to Philadelphia then?" The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken implications. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I hadn't considered it a possibility until now." Rylan nodded, his expression guarded. "Of course, you should take time to think about what you want." What she wanted, Jessamine realized with sudden clarity, was right in front of her. But how could she possibly say that? "I should check on Mrs. Finch," she said instead, rising from the table. "Thank you again for the journal. It's a thoughtful gift." Outside, the snow had tapered off, though drifts still rose high against the buildings. Jessamine made her way carefully to Mrs. Finch's cottage, finding the older woman sleeping fitfully, her fever still high. After refreshing the cool cloth on her forehead and ensuring the fire burned steadily, Jessamine returned to the main house. She found Rylan in the parlor, staring into the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked up as she entered, a question in his eyes. "Her fever hasn't broken yet," Jessamine reported, "but she's resting as comfortably as can be expected." "You should rest too," he said, setting down his glass. "It's been a long day." "Yes," she hesitated, reluctant to end their time together. "Rylan, about the letter, you don't owe me any explanations," he interrupted. "Your future is your own to decide." "But I want you to understand." A sudden pounding at the door cut her off. Rylan frowned, moving quickly to answer it. One of the ranch hands, Tom, stood on the porch, his face grim beneath his snow-covered hat. "Sorry to disturb you, boss, but we've got trouble," he said. "Just rode in from the north pasture. The cattle broke through the ice on the creek. We've got at least a dozen head trapped." Rylan was already reaching for his coat. "Get the others. Bring ropes and axes." "You can't go out in this," Jessamine protested. "Your ribs haven't fully healed." "Those cattle will die if we don't get them out," Rylan replied, pulling on his boots. "I can't ask the men to do what I won't do myself." Knowing argument was futile, Jessamine helped him into his heavy coat. "Be careful," she said softly. "Please." He paused, looking down at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a moment she thought he might say something more, might finally bridge the careful distance between them. Instead, he nodded once and was gone, following Tom into the snowy night. Alone in the house, Jessamine found sleep impossible. She checked on Mrs. Finch twice more, relieved to find the older woman's fever beginning to subside. Between visits, she paced the parlor, watching the windows for any sign of Rylan's return. As the hours stretched on, her worry deepened into fear. It was nearly dawn when she heard horses approaching. Rushing to the door, she saw the men returning, their exhausted mounts trudging through the snow. Rylan was among them, slumped in his saddle, his face gray with fatigue and pain. Jessamine ran out to meet them, heedless of the cold. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "Just tired," Rylan said, his voice hoarse. "We saved most of them." With Tom's help, she got Rylan into the house and upstairs to his bedroom. He was soaked through, his clothes stiff with ice. "You need to get warm," she insisted, stoking the fire in his room to a blaze. "Those wet clothes have to come off." Under different circumstances, such a statement would have been scandalous, but urgency overrode propriety. Rylan didn't protest as she helped him remove his frozen coat and boots. He managed his shirt himself, though each movement clearly caused him pain. "Your ribs," she said, noticing the fresh bruising along his side. "You've re-injured them." "Worth it," he muttered. "Saved 11 head." "At what cost?" she demanded, anger born of fear making her voice sharp. "What good is your ranch if you work yourself to death?" He looked up at her, surprise registering through his exhaustion. "You sound like you care." "Of course I care." The words burst from her before she could stop them. "I've been half out of my mind with worry all night." Something shifted in his expression, then the guarded look giving way to a vulnerable hope that took her breath away. "Jessamine," he began, but a violent shiver interrupted whatever he meant to say. "You need to rest. she said, gathering her composure. We can talk later. She helped him into bed, piling extra blankets over him, then turned to leave. His hand shot out, catching hers. Stay, he said simply. Just until I fall asleep. So she stayed, seated in the chair beside his bed, holding his hand as his breathing gradually deepened into sleep. In the quiet of the early morning, watching over him, Jessamine made her decision. The money from Philadelphia represented not a path back to her old life, but the means to choose her new one freely, Mrs. Finch's recovery was slow but steady, and within a week, she was well enough to resume light duties around the house. Rylan, too, was on the mend, though Jessamine insisted he limit his activities, particularly in the continuing cold weather. Christmas approached, bringing with it a festive atmosphere despite the recent hardships. Jessamine threw herself into preparations, baking cookies and pies, decorating every corner of the house with evergreen boughs and red ribbons, and even organizing small gifts for the ranch hands. On Christmas Eve, with Mrs. Finch feeling well enough to join them, they gathered in the parlor after dinner. Outside, stars glittered in a clear, cold sky, the storm long past. Inside, firelight cast a warm glow over the room, reflecting off the ornaments on the small tree in the corner. This is the finest Christmas I can remember at the ranch, Mrs. Finch declared, sipping her mulled cider. You've brought a woman's touch to the place, Jessamine. It's been my pleasure, she replied, conscious of Rylan's eyes on her. Since the night of the cattle rescue, something had changed between them, a tension, an awareness that remained unspoken but palpable. After exchanging modest gifts, handkerchiefs embroidered by Jessamine for Mrs. Finch, a knitted scarf from the housekeeper for Jessamine, and for Rylan, a pair of fine leather gloves that the women had pooled their resources to purchase in town, Mrs. Finch announced she was retiring to her cottage. These old bones need rest, she said with a knowing smile. Merry Christmas to you both. Alone with Rylan, Jessamine felt suddenly shy. He stood by the fireplace, the new gloves in his hands, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. I have something else for you, he said finally, reaching into his pocket. It's not much, but… He extended his hand, revealing a small silver locket on a delicate chain. Jessamine took it carefully, opening the clasp to find it empty inside. It was my mother's, Rylan explained. She always said it was meant to hold memories worth keeping. It's beautiful, she whispered, closing it gently, but I couldn't possibly accept something so personal. I want you to have it, he insisted. May I? At her nod, he stepped behind her, carefully fastening the chain around her neck. His fingers brushed her skin, sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the winter cold. Perfect, he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. Jessamine turned to face him, summoning her courage. I have something for you as well, not a physical gift, but a decision. Rylan's expression grew serious. About Philadelphia? Yes, she took a deep breath. I've decided to stay in Kansas. Relief washed over his features, quickly followed by caution. Here at the ranch, if you'll have me, she said quietly, not as your housekeeper, though. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by a hope so naked it made her heart ache. Jessamine, he began, taking her hands in his. When you first arrived in Clearwater Creek, all you had was Nathaniel Wilkes' name and the promise of a future that disappeared before it could begin. I never thought I'd find myself wishing I could give you my name instead. Rylan, she whispered, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. I love you, he said simply. I think I've loved you since I saw you standing alone at that stagecoach station, looking lost but determined. I love your strength, your kindness, the way you've made this house a home. I love that you care enough to argue with me when I'm being stubborn. A laugh bubbled up through the tears that had begun to fall. You are impossibly stubborn, so I've been told. He smiled, raising a hand to gently wipe away her tears. Jessamine Porter, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because you need a home or protection, but because perhaps you might love me too. I do love you, she answered, her voice steady despite her tears. I love your integrity, your quiet strength, the way you care for everyone around you. I love that you respect me enough to let me make my own choices. Is that a yes? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I will marry you, Rylan Blackwood. He drew her into his arms then, carefully because of his healing ribs, and kissed her with a tenderness that spoke of both passion and promise. Jessamine returned his kiss without hesitation, all the longing she'd suppressed finally finding expression. When they finally parted, Rylan rested his forehead against hers. I want you to know something, he said quietly. The money from Philadelphia, it's yours to use however you wish. I don't want you to ever feel trapped or dependent. I know, she replied, touched by his understanding. I was thinking we might use it to expand the ranch, perhaps add some dairy cows or improve the breeding stock. Rylan laughed, a sound of pure joy. Already planning improvements to my operation? Our operation, she corrected with a smile. Partners in all things, remember. I like the sound of that. He kissed her again, briefly but with unmistakable promise. Merry Christmas, Jessamine. Merry Christmas, Rylan. Spring came early to Kansas that year, bringing with it green grass, wildflowers, and preparations for a wedding. Jessamine and Rylan were married on a clear April morning, with Mrs. Finch, the ranch hands, and half the town of Clearwater Creek in attendance. The ceremony was held under a canopy of blooming apple trees behind the ranch house, with Reverend Thompson from town officiating. Jessamine wore a gown of ivory silk that she'd sewn herself, with lace at the collar and cuffs that Mrs. Abernathy had contributed as a wedding gift. Around her neck hung Rylan's mother's locket, now containing a small photograph of him on one side and a lock of her own auburn hair on the other. I, Rylan, take you, Jessamine, to be my lawfully wedded wife, he vowed, his voice clear and steady as he placed a simple gold band on her finger. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. I, Jessamine, take you, Rylan, to be my lawfully wedded husband, she replied, her heart so full she thought it might burst. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. By the authority vested in me, Reverend Thompson proclaimed, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Rylan needed no further encouragement. He gathered Jessamine in his arms and kissed her thoroughly, to the cheers and applause of their guests. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with tables set up in the yard, music provided by fiddle players from town, and enough food to feed twice their number. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the ranch, Rylan pulled Jessamine away from the festivities for a moment of privacy behind the barn. Happy, Mrs. Blackwood? He asked, his arms around her waist. Happier than I ever thought possible, she replied, reaching up to touch his face. When I came west with nothing but Nathaniel Wilkes's name, I never imagined I'd find a love like this. I thank God every day that he wasn't there to meet you, Rylan admitted. Selfish as that may be, not selfish, she corrected. Providential. We were meant to find each other, I believe that now. He kissed her then, a kiss full of promise for their future together. We should return to our guests, he murmured against her lips, before they come looking for us. Let them look, she replied with uncharacteristic boldness. I'm exactly where I want to be. They did return to the celebration eventually, accepting congratulations and well wishes until the last guest departed. That night, as husband and wife, they began their life together properly, discovering each other in ways both tender and passionate. In the quiet aftermath, lying in each other's arms, Jessamine traced the scars on Rylan's chest. Tell me about these, she requested softly. So he did, sharing stories of his past that he'd never told another soul, the battle wounds from the war, the marks left by a father whose approval he could never earn, the results of ranch accidents and frontier encounters. In turn, she shared her own invisible scars, the loss of her parents, the humiliation of poverty, the betrayal of trust. No more secrets between us, Rylan promised, kissing her forehead. From now on, we face everything together. Together, she agreed, settling into the circle of his arms. The years that followed brought both joy and challenges to the Blackwood Ranch. Using Jessamine's inheritance, they expanded their operation, adding dairy cows as she had suggested and improving their cattle stock with quality breeding bulls. The ranch prospered under their joint management, with Jessamine's practical efficiency complementing Rylan's visionary ambition. Their first child, a daughter they named Elizabeth after Jessamine's mother, arrived just over a year after their wedding. She had Rylan's storm-gray eyes and Jessamine's auburn hair, and from her first breath, she had both parents wrapped around her tiny fingers. "She's perfect," Rylan whispered, cradling his daughter with a tenderness that brought tears to Jessamine's eyes, just like her mother. "She's strong," Jessamine observed, watching the infant grip her father's finger. "Like her father." 2 years later, they welcomed a son, James, named for Rylan's older brother who had fallen at Gettysburg. The boy grew to be the image of his father, with the same determined jaw and thoughtful expression. With the children came changes to the ranch. The small schoolhouse Rylan built halfway between their property and town eventually grew to serve all the children in the area. Jessamine, drawing on her education in Philadelphia, often served as teacher during winter months when regular instructors couldn't make the journey from town. Mrs. Finch remained with them until her passing at the age of 78, by which time she had become more family than employee. They buried her in the small cemetery on the ranch property, beneath a cottonwood tree where she had often sat to watch the children play. Through it all, the droughts and blizzards, the good years and lean ones, the joys of watching their children grow, and the sorrows that life inevitably brings, Rylan and Jessamine's love remained constant, deepening with each passing season. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Rylan surprised Jessamine with a gift, the deed to the ranch, redrawn to list them as equal partners. "It's always been yours as much as mine," he explained as she examined the document with astonishment. "Now it's official." "The Blackwood Ranch," she read, running her fingers over their names side by side on the paper. "Our legacy for Elizabeth and James. And perhaps others," Rylan suggested, a hopeful note in his voice. Jessamine smiled, placing a hand over her still flat stomach. "Perhaps sooner than you think." His eyes widened with understanding, then joy. "Truly, you're certain as one can be," she confirmed. "Dr. Mason confirmed it yesterday. We should expect a new edition by winter." Rylan pulled her into his arms, laughing with delight. 10 years ago, you arrived in Clearwater Creek with nothing but Nathaniel Wilkes's name. And now I have yours," she finished, reaching up to touch the locket that still hung around her neck. "Along with everything that truly matters: love, family, home. No regrets?" he asked, suddenly serious. "About the path your life has taken?" Jessamine considered the question, thinking of the frightened young woman who had stood alone at the stagecoach station, bereft of everything she'd hoped for. That woman could never have imagined the happiness that awaited her, the love she would find, the family she would build. "Not a single one," she assured him, rising on tiptoe to kiss him softly. "Every step led me exactly where I was meant to be." Their third child, another daughter they named Grace, arrived that December during the season's first snowfall. As Jessamine nursed the infant by the fire, with Elizabeth and James peering curiously at their new sister and Rylan watching his family with undisguised adoration, she felt a contentment so complete it brought tears to her eyes. "What is it, love?" Rylan asked, noticing her emotion. "I was just thinking," she replied, smiling through her tears, "how fortunate I am that Nathaniel Wilkes wasn't there to meet my stagecoach." Rylan laughed, moving to kneel beside her chair. "I think that might be the first time anyone has called Nathaniel Wilkes's failings a blessing." "It was, though," Jessamine insisted, "the greatest blessing of my life." He leaned forward to kiss her, then the baby's downy head. "Mine too, Jessamine, mine too." Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. Inside, the Blackwood family remained gathered by the fire, secure in the knowledge that whatever the future might hold, they would face it as they had faced the past decade together, with love as their foundation and each other as their strength. For Jessamine, who had once been abandoned with nothing but a stranger's name, the journey had come full circle. In finding Rylan, she had not only gained his name but also discovered her own strength, her capacity for love, and the true meaning of home. It wasn't a place, she realized. Watching her husband with their children, it was the people who filled your heart, the love that sustained you through life's storms, and the legacy of kindness and courage you passed on to the next generation. That legacy would continue long after them, in the children and grandchildren who would inherit not just the Blackwood Ranch, but also the values they had lived by: honesty, hard work, resilience, and above all, love that endured through every season of life. As night fell over the Kansas prairie, Jessamine Blackwood offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the unexpected path that had led her here to this man, these children, this life that exceeded every dream she'd ever dared to dream. From abandonment to belonging, from solitude to family, from a borrowed name to one freely given with love, her journey was complete. And in that completion, she had found not an ending, but the most beautiful of beginnings.